All right. My name is Penezma John from the University of Florida. I'm joined by my colleague.
This is Ronan Hart.
This is the Underground Railroad Oral History Project, a collaboration between UF African American Studies, the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and the National Park Service Network to Freedom Program. It is 1:08 p.m. December 16th, 2025, and we are speaking digitally with Mrs. Lee Blake, a descendant of Amelia and William Piper. All right, could you begin by introducing yourself? Spell out your name for the record.
My name is Lee Blake, Leeblake, and I am a resident of New Bedford, Massachusetts. I am also the president of the New Bedford Historical Society, which really focuses on African American and Cape Verdean, West Indian history. And I am a descendant of the Pipers, Amelia and William, and all their amazing descendants who were all involved in the Underground Railroad.
That's awesome. Thank you. Very excited to get into this interview. Where and when were you born?
And then was I what?
Born.
I was born in New Bedford in 1952.
Did you hear many family stories growing up?
I heard family stories, but not necessarily about the Underground Railroad. So, as an example, I heard family stories of my great grandmother going south to teach, but never why she went south to teach.
How was African American history taught to you in school? Was it different from the stories you heard at home?
Yes, it was very different. In many ways, because of the way that I was not taught about African American history, when I was in high school, I started researching and demanding that we know more about African American history here in New Bedford. And it really was because I was, 17. The public history movement was starting. I didn't know who Martin Luther King was because nobody in the community talked about him or in our schools. So I demanded to know. And it made me a community organizer. Not knowing and wanting to know made me an organizer.
Do you remember the first time you learned about your ancestors, William and Amelia Piper?
I remember because initially my family talked about the Pipers as being Native American, that they were Wampanoag Indians from Martha's Vineyard. So every Thanksgiving, my grandfather would do this whole speech about just think if your ancestors had killed those people when they came over, instead of being nice to them, where we would be right now. And he did that every Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Where do you think that story about them being Native American came from?
Well, I think that, I'm a Black historian, so I know there's some people who were just at the time, so that's the 50s and the 60s, in a community that had to deal with a lot of discrimination, that there was real concern about being labeled Black. Of course, that's different now, but then in New Bedford in particular, New Bedford has a very high percentage in terms of demographics, very high percentage of Portuguese immigrants. They have Cape Verdean immigrants, and Cape Verdean immigrants are Afro-Portuguese, but they had been colonized, so they believed that they were white. So no matter what color their skin was, they were white. And what would happen is that the Cape Verdeans would mock, oppress, the African Americans because we had been slaves and they weren't because they were Portuguese. But they were enslaved. And it took a long time for them to recognize that with the advent of the Cape Verdean independence movement, which is 1975.
So, returning to your ancestors, William and Amelia Piper, what do you know about their, I guess, starting from the beginning, their story in, they're from Virginia, right? What do you know anything about their early life in Virginia?
I just know a few things about their early life, and that's basically through research. And actually, you could say in one way, because my family was so adamant that my ancestors were Wampanoag, I went on a tour researching everything to find out if they were Wampanoag, are there papers that we could get, what would we have to do, because here, though different tribes, they're they're not necessarily allied with each other either. Oh, it's much better now. But between fighting over land and over casino rights, and people were deciding who was Native American and who's not, which of course is still going on now. But as I dug deeper and deeper into work, and also I joined a number of African American genealogical groups. So I started meeting people from other parts of the country who technically were my relatives. I met Pipers from Maine, Pipers from California. So we all had different pieces of the historical record as our heritage.
How did it feel meeting those people that ended up being your family?
Well, I was very excited about it.
Mhm.
Um, I I think that family relationships and, of course, ancestry is important to carry on. So when I started to meet these people who I had no idea about, um, and also my grandfather, who's Herbert Blake, he was like an amateur historian. So he kept a lot of records, which he gave to me when he passed. And then as I start looking through his papers, then I would see at one point in time, there was a family newsletter that went to all these different people in California and Maryland. So I wrote to those people and started to get reacquainted.
That's awesome. You told us about a couple of groups that you joined. Can you tell us about the New Bedford Female Union
Oh,
Society?
I can tell you about the New Bedford Female Union Society. Um, New Bedford had a couple of women's organizations. At the time, they were organizations that were anti-slavery organizations. The white women and the black women did not meet together, they met separately. They had their own branch, so to speak. Um, but they would support each other. So I'll give you an example. When I did my research, I came across a newspaper article in the local paper, the New Bedford papers, how the female societies were helping Harriet Jacobs. So this is the white society. They were collecting books and clothing to send to Mrs. Jacobs, and that was Harriet. And they knew Harriet because of the black women in New Bedford. And of course, Harriet lived in Cambridge then, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the white women were supporting a number of the women in New Bedford who had gone south to teach. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on because two of the Piper women go south. But you know, New Bedford had two daily newspapers. So there was always room for a report on the women's committees. So the female union would have a little article in the paper, who was at the meeting, who paid dues, what they were doing. So those things were relatively easy to follow up on.
So how is it that William and Amelia came to be involved in this kind of milieu in New Bedford, and how did they make it to New Bedford in the first
All right,
place?
so this is the family story. The family story is that Amelia and William were married and lived in Alexandria, Virginia. And they had 5 children. 2 of their children, their 2 oldest sons, Robert and Philip, were mariners. So Robert and Philip, they're like 12 and 14 years old at the time. And they were ship boys working on ships. William and Amelia doesn't really say what they were doing except that they lived in Alexandria, which of course was a prime slave trading city. So what I see is that Robert and Philip start asking around the shipbuilding area, the ship areas, about ways to get their family out of Alexandria. And they end up in New Bedford. And the interesting thing is the whole family comes to New Bedford. So it's not one at a time, which is the way a lot of the other families in New Bedford come. But they came as a group, husband, wife, with 3 children, because the 2 boys could go independently because they're working on ships. So that's what we see and that's what we hear. And when I have done different research with different organizations, that's what I see. So about 1828, 1830, they come to New Bedford. And they may have come with the Roach family. The Roach family was a whaling ship, whaling owner, entrepreneur. And once the Pipers come to New Bedford, the Roach family helps them with housing, helps them with jobs, and then helps other people that the Pipers bring along. And one of those is John Jacobs. So they're involved with the Jacob family too.
So that opens up a couple questions that we wanted to ask at the end of that. But first, for me, I'm curious about the ongoing relationship with the Roach family, and what do you kind of make of that relationship? You know, what was the basis for it, and have you ever found any descendants from the Roach family? Are any of them still around New Bedford?
So the Pipers have an ongoing relationship with the Roach family. William Piper actually works for the Roaches. He's their driver, their stage driver. He also is referred to as a hostler, and a hostler is someone who takes care of horses. So he worked for them for a number of years. And it's mentioned in some papers that the Roach family helped Robert Piper to become a caterer. So the catering business is part of what some of the family members go into, but that the Roach family helped with that. When William Roach passes away, he leaves money in his will for William Piper.
You also shared a remarkable document with us, a letter written by William Piper about the call for a national immigration convention. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting. I still work on these things.
Mm,
Um, the New Bedford was well known as an organizing place for African American advocacy, anti-slavery activities in between 1830 and the end of the Civil War.
mm,
So one of the things that New Bedford was known for, they had independent Black churches. The Bethel AME Church here just turned 202 years old, and it's one of the Black churches set up by the AME in this part of the country.
mm,
So I bring that up because they were the site of some of the colored conventions.
mm,
And I manage the Nathan and Polly Johnson House, which was an Underground Railroad site. But also, Nathan Johnson was the chair of at least two, if not three, colored conventions.
mm,
So you see, his name comes up a lot with the Pipers, Robert Piper, William Piper, Nathan Johnson, and many others signed the kinds of documents that you're talking about. These letters would go to William Lloyd Garrison to be in the Liberator, or they would go to the legislature. I have some papers where the Pipers were organizing letters against the colonization of Africa by African Americans. We fought and died here. We ain't going back. Those kind of letters, all signed by family members and other Black community members.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading that letter about the Emigration Society, and I feel like William's voice kind of comes through as this very like confident, kind of pretty sure of himself in this kind of argument he's making. What from all of the material that you've read from him and Amelia, what have you picked up on about like their character or who they were as people or their voice in their writing?
I have, I'm incredibly proud of the work that they did at the time. Um, had almost no money when they came here, but obviously they got involved in trades and working with the community. They helped organize some of the Black churches in New Bedford. Um, I mentioned the Bethel AME Church, but William Piper was involved in the Salem Baptist Church, which was another Black church. And at different points in my particular career, people at those churches have asked me to go and speak about the Pipers because they were founding members. So I do things like that. But it's always amazing to me how they struggled every day and thought about every day other people who were African American who were enslaved somewhere. And they worked consistently throughout their lives. In, often I write articles, I do research, and I connect with a lot of people who are writing and doing the same things. And it's just amazing to see three, four, five generations of people who worked on the Underground Railroad to end slavery, how long it takes. And it gives you a real appreciation of community organizing in a very different way. Um, you know, I'm I do a lot of community organizing in New Bedford, and people want things to happen like right away. Right. Oh man, let's pass this bill. Everything will be better. But then you look at these other people, generation by generation, legislation by legislation, over 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
mhm, yeah. Can you highlight some of the community organization work that you do now, today?
Well, of course, I do the New Bedford Historical Society, and that organization really is only 30 years old. New Bedford did not have a historical society. What New Bedford had was they belonged to a historical society of the suburbs. So Dartmouth, Westport, all the white suburbs, I'll put it that way. But our people really had a strong history, and we were not being included in the white suburbs. So we developed our own. So part of my organizing is managing and working on connections to the Underground Railroad, connections to the whaling industry. I put together a National Endowment for the Humanities program called Sailing to Freedom, which has turned into the maritime trades and the Underground Railroad, which people didn't know, but we knew. So, but those are the things that we would say to people. We knew our people are on whaling ships and they're helping other people escape constantly. So, of course, now we have Marcus Redica's book, Freedom Ship. Tim Walker is my partner. He and I put together this exhibit that has gone up and down the East Coast. And now I think it's in Philadelphia now. And in February, we're going to show it here again in New Bedford. So, with lectures and talks. Um, so, that's some of my organizing. But my organizing also is around arts and culture and visible evidence of Black culture. So, I'm on committees for community arts and culture. And the Historical Society has put up some really amazing murals. Of course, you've seen our 54th mural, right? That's a mural you're all standing in front of. But there are murals like that all downtown. Um, Jazz musicians, the 54th Regiment. I organized Abolition Row Park. I organized the statue of Frederick Douglass. And I do that, first of all, and that goes back to the very question you asked me initially, is because those things were not taught to us when we were in public schools. So for me, as an educator, I've been an educator for years and years and years. For me, it's important to have visual reminders for kids, for parents, for people who are not going to go to an academic lecture and hear about the 17th century because they could give a good shit, but they want to see the pictures. They want to see the images. They want to see pictures of my ancestors, Amelia and William, which I put in the exhibits, but they want to see those pictures because it resonates with them and their family. So my organizing around arts, culture, physical, visual images of Black people is important. And of course, the park. So Abolition Row Park is like one of my jewels in the crown because it is right across the street from the Nathan and Polly Johnson House, an Underground Railroad site with national status. People come, scholars come to see the house all the time. And across the street from the house, until we did the work, there was an empty lot full of garbage. And I would say to people, if this was Herman Melville's house, you would have a park here. But the people that we live across the street are Black, so that's not that important. I said, I'm going to change that. People would say, oh, I don't know why you bother. Why do I bother? There's garbage and furniture in it all the time. People would. One day we came to the Johnson house and there was a dinner table with chairs all around it, all broken up in the park. I said, who wants to come here? It looks like a ghetto. It is a ghetto. It's the history of Black people ghettoized. I said, that has to stop. So I work. I am a grant writer. I am a writer. I'm an educator. I worked with a few nonprofits, and we were able to raise $1.4 million to transform that empty lot full of garbage into an amazing park that everybody comes to now with the statue of Frederick Douglass.
Mm.
And you all know that I would go to people and say, well, what should I do? I'm very, humble. Oh, I don't know why you bother. I would be like, what? Frederick Douglass lived, well, who was he? That's the first thing. Oh,
Mm.
Frederick Douglass. Oh, yeah, he came here. He came through. I said, he didn't come through. This was his home for 5 years as a free man. He didn't just like come through. All of his children were born in New Bedford. And part of my role and the role of the Historical Society is to raise the visibility and the history of these prominent people that we consider prominent, and people have no idea who they were. So doing that is part of my organizing.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
yeah, it is an amazing park. That's all I was
Yeah,
going to say is that
it is.
I learned a lot even reading, and I love the way it highlights not even just people in New Bedford, but the broader history of abolitionism and the Underground Railroad. So I was wondering what it's been like to see that education kind of spread through the community and to start conversations about this history. Like how rewarding is that?
Well, somebody asked me something yesterday. Um, they wanted to know how the school system was changing because initially my first job in 1975 was teaching African American studies in the local school. So I talked about how our new school superintendent, when we opened up the park 2 years ago and we unveiled the statue of Douglas, he had all of the school principals at that event. At that event. And he calls regularly, he calls. They're getting ready to name a new school after one of the white abolitionists. So, the people get like, oh, what's Lee going to say? Lee says that is fabulous. That is wonderful. We don't want you to organize and think just of the black abolitionists. White people did this work too. And white people need to do this work now. So don't be telling, oh, he wasn't black. No, he wasn't black, but he made sure this is a person named James Condon, and James Condon went around in the 1850s and 60s and collected brochures, papers. He would go to some of the organizing meetings of Black people and save their papers because he was going to write a book. Unfortunately, he saves everything and then he dies. But he left everything at the library. So we have all of these amazing resources from this white man who thought the 54th Regiment, for instance, was just amazing. He saved all their papers. We have letters, and it's because of his archival work that we have these things. But now the school system is naming a school after him. And part of his role as an archivist and as somebody who helped save Black history. That's in his biography. So that's pretty powerful.
That's amazing.
That's
Yeah.
really pretty powerful.
Yeah. Archiving as activism, which is hopefully what we're doing here as well.
Right. And the other thing is that I'm a grant writer, as I mentioned, but I had worked with the library, our public library, to write some grants so that they would be an Underground Railroad site because of the paperwork that Condon did. Because they had his research. So they're a site on the Underground Railroad.
Wow.
You just
That's
spread those things
awesome.
out. There's no reason
Yeah.
to keep those things,
Yeah. My next question is twofold. How do you do it all? As well as folks that want to get started in community organization but just don't know where to start. What would you tell them?
Well, I'm getting ready to do a project now.
Mm.
uh, I'll give you, I'm going to do a descendants project with individuals that we know of, as you know now. There are a number of people who are buried in New Bedford who were Black abolitionists, and their families are spread out over the country, but they come to visit. So we're going to do a project where we're going to at least clean the grave sites, clean the stones, clean the grave sites, probably do a little website. And that might take a couple of years, but it certainly will be something that people will be able to see next summer, because once you start spraying the stones, they clean up pretty quickly. Um, but it's like, why did I decide to do that? Because every once in a while, we have a group of teens who maraud through the cemeteries and break the stones. So, how do you work on that? You work on that by showing people the importance of the people that lived in this city and died and are buried there, but also the importance of the stone. So we're doing that, and it really is. We saw a need. People came together. We have different communities in the region. Westport, for instance, has done this, and now they're going to be our allies and they're going to help train our people. And Westport, and we have our Civil War area. There's a whole area of stones from the Civil War. So we have a military round table that's cleaning those stones. So it's like kind of creating a synergy where people can talk about the importance of the grave sites. But New Bedford has, a nationally recognized cemetery. So you don't want people running through there and setting stones on fire and everything. But what do you do so people see the importance and the highlight of the history? It's another way of also showing young people the history. So we're pretty excited about that. And we already started now. And it's interesting when I bring it up, people say, "Whoa, I want to be on that committee. I want to do that." I'm like, "Your name's on the list. Yeah, I'll put your name right on the list." Because you only need like a handful of people to start it. And you don't, again, it's not a quick fix. It's something is going to take a little time, but as you develop it, people will want to be involved in it. So, how do I do it all now? I'm retired now. But before, I was teaching. Was a synergy between my K through 12 teaching and the ability to do some of this research. Um, I lived in New York for a number of years. I worked for and with Black politicians in New York. So there are certain things that you learn and the skills you learn. And when I came back to New Bedford, which was like 20 years ago, um, New Bedford is just a much easier place to work. If you have a good idea, people will rally around you. In the arts and culture groups, there's a lot of groups here. People are all trying to figure out a way to bring visibility to the arts and culture here in New Bedford. So when they see that you're doing work that enhances what goes on here, they're excited. So that works out, makes it easier.
Find a group of people on the same page as well as commitment because it'll take time.
And I'll do one more. Massachusetts. I work with the Massachusetts Humanities Council. I work with the Massachusetts Cultural Council. The state has a number of resources, funding resources, as well as training resources. So Massachusetts does pretty well with arts and culture and history. And not all states, have a nice pot of money that you can go to when you have a good idea, but Massachusetts does.
Yeah. I wanted to back up and ask you about another document that you sent us to look over, the one about Elizabeth Piper Ensley and kind of what her relationship to the rest of the Piper family was, and I guess what that her life and what her story means to you.
Well, Elizabeth Piper Ensley actually grew up in New Bedford, and let's see, she has an interesting life because it also follows the path of a few other educators who came from New Bedford. She goes to Howard University. She teaches at Howard, um, along with another woman, Martha Briggs. There are some of the women that are involved in kind of the foundational education footsteps of Howard. And Elizabeth goes to Philadelphia, she goes to Howard, and she ends up in Colorado. She marries, I forget his name, but she marries Ensley. They have two children, one who dies almost immediately, unfortunately. But she is another a voice, a suffrage voice. So she's another one of the generations. So she is, oh, I'm not going to remember, but it'll come to me. She actually was given, I have her paperwork right here. She was given an award by the state of Colorado for her work. So I just happen to have it here. The National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution, they give Elizabeth Piper Ensley a certificate of award for women American history. This is March 2022, but she is given this by the state of Colorado for her work organizing women and men to vote in Colorado. So she organizes get out the vote activity before women are even given the vote in this country, in Colorado. So that's why she got the certificate. Um, she was a member of the NAACP, not here, but in different parts of the country. She is buried in Denver. Let's see. When people in New Bedford talk about the suffrage movement, she's the only person that we can point to in New Bedford who was involved in the suffrage movement. She's born in 1847, and her family goes back, of course, here with Amelia and William. And there's a whole list of all the different committees she belonged in, but they're mostly in other states. She did teach here for a short period of time, teach in Boston for a short period of time. At some point in time, she goes to Paris, and I'm sure it's like one of those situations where an older woman needed a companion, so she gets to go to Paris to take care of this woman. So we see stories like that, but that's how she gets to Paris.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the importance of showing people images in this education. I have to say the image of her, I see the family resemblance. I think you're kind of her spitting image. You you also mentioned her going to Howard with Martha Briggs. So
Right.
I was wondering if you can say more about the movement of all these educators who came from New Bedford and that significance to the story.
Well, I will tell you about those women. It's funny, I just had this right here. Of course, my office. So you see my background because you don't want to see my office. um, so I'm going to go back to the Pipers, And I'm going to go to Emma Louise Piper. So Emma Louise Piper is William and Amelia's granddaughter. So this is the third generation of the family that works in the Underground Railroad. So Emma is involved with her grandmother and her aunt in the Female Union Society that you talked about. Okay. So she's involved in that. Her father was Robert Piper. Along with a number of other women, right before the Civil War ends, there's a call that goes out from the Freedmen's Aid Society, local churches, and when I say local churches, churches in different communities across the North that wanted to help the formerly enslaved people be ready for freedom. And being ready for freedom is teaching them how to read and write and do math so that they are not oppressed because they were not allowed all those educational advantages. So Emma is one of the women who goes south. In New Bedford, there are 40 different women who go south from New Bedford to teach. And here's one of those stories where I'm working with this whole like network of people who are doing biographies of all of these women. We only have a few pictures, but I've done some of that work. But I have this small group of women. We're researching. That would be a fabulous book. They're black and white. Many of them are women of color. There are also some men too, who all go south and teach. And one by one, we kind of raise their visibility, they raise their image to talk about who these women were. So, of course, I know about my great great grandmother, Emma Louise, and her story is, of course, a lovely love story. But Emma Louise and her aunt Rebecca Piper, so there are two Pipers who go south just about 1860 to 1863 to teach. Emma goes to Maryland, and I'm sure you have the newspaper article about the school that she was at. If not, I have that somewhere. But she goes to teach. She's only like 18 or 19 years old. So when when you know about the way that women lived at that time, she wasn't a traveler. She didn't go like we do to Boston here and there. This is like her first big trip, is to go south where it was dangerous, to go south to teach. So that's what she does. And she goes to Maryland, and I think she's only there for 2 years. And she's not just teaching children, she's teaching people who have not been able to read. So she's teaching men, adult women, she's teaching, and she teaches in a school that has never had a teacher before. And that's where she meets her husband. So she meets her husband there. And when her time is up, was it they signed, these women signed contracts for a year or two or three. When her time is up and she comes back to New Bedford, he follows her back to New Bedford. And he comes here and he has to go through the whole thing of asking her family if he can marry her. And he didn't have any family here or any place to live. So they allowed him and they gave him 1 year to make his fortune. And after that year, that they would reconsider whether or not he could marry their daughter. So he moves into the family home with his trunk and his little possessions. And in 1 year, he's made it and they get married. And you know, in those days, if you were a woman and you got married, your educational career is over because you can't
Yeah.
teach, can't teach anymore. Um, so that is Emma Louise's story. But her and her husband go on to have 13 children. 13. Uh, but so Emma and Rebecca, those are the family members from the Pipers who go south to teach. But there are a lot of others. One woman is Eleanor Kempton, who we actually have written about because she goes south. Her family was a very wealthy white family, and she goes south to teach. And she's there for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and she drowns. So we write about her story. And, uh, these people have really amazing lives, and they took so many chances that were dangerous in order to help people they did not know. So we write about them, and we, in that sense, save their legacy and promote their history, because they had amazing lives. And I do women's studies and Black studies. So when you talk about women, what women did really incredible things, and they get no play, no play. So we make sure that people understand what kind of chances these women took to make sure that other people would be prepared and other people would be able to have some kind of agency and not just be, well, the Civil War's over, slavery's over, and now you'll just have to work for me for free. That wasn't going to happen, because of these women. And that's just women from New Bedford. There are women all over the country on the north who went south to teach. And you're just starting to see their letters and their papers and everything now coming forward.
You're doing an amazing job preserving history. And out of all of your accomplishments preserving this history in New Bedford, which are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of the work I'm doing now with women and what women did. Women saving clothing and supporting Harriet Jacobs. Um, my my great 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 grandmother writing a letter to William Lloyd Garrison asking for him to advertise their anti-slavery fair, things like that. And I do want you to know what happens to that stuff. So I get this letter, and it's how we share these ideas, how we share this material culture with other people. So I'm going to take Amelia Piper's letter to William Garrison and give you an example of what we do with that. So that is somebody found it in the Liberator many, many years ago and showed it to me. And of course, then I get it and I retype it and everything and I share it. But how I share it, um, I work with a number of nonprofit organizations that are doing historical exhibits. And one of the organizations in another part of Massachusetts, we were having a conversation about how she was going to put her exhibit together. And her exhibit was on women's handicrafts. So embroideries, dollies, different kinds of handicraft that would beautify a home. And she said, I just don't know how to tie this in to what women were thinking at the time. So I said, well, I have something for you. And I read the letter to her about how my great 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 grandmother talked about knitting and making sure our needles were busy because we were supporting women who were enslaved with our handicraft. So that letter became a part of their exhibit. And that was only like 5 years ago. So they used that to show what women were doing with handicrafts. So that's one example. Um, we have Polly Johnson was a baker, and we have recipe cards for her famous Polly Johnson ginger cookies, which I'll be baking Friday. But we have her bio on the back, and there's now a movie on Polly Johnson, a 20-minute movie on one of the incidents where slave catchers came to New Bedford and tried to steal enslaved people. And Polly, they come to Polly's bakery and she attacks them with a rolling pin, of course. But how also the white and black men in New Bedford come to make sure that kidnapping does not happen. So there are ways that we've been able to do that. And you had mentioned what other educators came from New Bedford. So Ellen Kempton, I got her first name wrong. Ellen Kempton, Rebecca Piper, my Emma Piper, and there's a number of other women. But Martha Briggs was very important. And she's one of the people that was on the list for you guys to interview. But because of the shutdown, her members could not talk to you. But I'll send you her name and I'll send you the biography, the work that has been done on her, because Martha Briggs ends up becoming one of the members of a Black historical organization that exists now that raises scholarships for women of color and has been in existence a little over 100 years. So Martha Briggs became their founding image, I guess is a good way to say it, because she was never a member of the club. The club adopted her as their founding reason for becoming a club. But Martha Briggs' father, John Briggs, was the man who mentored Frederick Douglass when Frederick Douglass came to New Bedford. So when I started doing all this research on Martha Briggs, every place that Martha Briggs worked, so she worked in Washington, she worked in Boston, she worked in Maryland, every place that she worked, Frederick Douglass went to see her. He went to visit her to make sure she was okay. And there are times that he writes little notes about her to his family, to Rosetta, for instance. He finds out she's sick in Washington. So that's kind of that's a little piece of the story of Frederick Douglass's loyalty to people who helped him in the past. But it's also part of the story of building that whole educational relationship in Washington, D.C. Washington names the D.C. public schools, named 2 schools after Martha Briggs. And Frederick Douglass goes to the teachers union and the public school system and demands that a school be named after Martha Briggs. It's in the newspaper.
Yeah.
It's like this big headline in the newspaper. But it's interesting because, as you mentioned, a lot of these women were really involved in education because they recognize that without the ability to read, write, do the figures and mathematics, people were never going to get anywhere. They recognized that. And they also recognized that education was going to be the salvation and the way that people get out of always being poor and oppressed. So you see in New Bedford, you see lots of public schools here. The schools in New Bedford were always, um, they were never segregated. Blacks and whites always went to school together here. They might not have sat in the same place, but they were in the same classroom.
Mm.
But most of the time, we don't hear a lot about the discrimination here. But in other parts, Westport, some of the other cities around here, there was discrimination in the classroom, but New Bedford did not do that. And at one point in time, New Bedford set up one of the normal schools so that there were a number of teachers going through the schools. And that's when you start seeing the discrimination because they closed the normal school because too many Black women were being graduated. So that was kind of interesting. But the Black community saw education as really important here in New Bedford, but also in other places.
Mm.
Yeah. So we are coming up on an hour, and I want to make sure we're respectful of your time, or want to check if you need a break or anything. But we're happy to keep going a while longer if you'd like.
Well, are there any other questions?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have a couple, at least following up on what we've been talking about so far.
All right.
So one thing is with this project, we've been really interested in the way that after Civil War and after emancipation, the kind of Underground Railroad networks and figures continued their work just in different ways. And I think all of the educators that you were just talking about is one example of that, of continuing those networks and working for justice. But do you have any other examples of the way that that network in New Bedford continued their work in other fields?
Well, it's very interesting because, of course, one of the ways that a number of uh, one of the places that employment was available here in New Bedford was with whaling. So whaling is on the in the 1880s, and so whaling is on the down low. So people are not whaling as much. So all those industries are kind of fizzling out. So one thing that you see is that a number of um, members of the Black community start going to other places, California especially. So that's one thing that you see is that families, they follow the whaling trade. So they're leaving the coast and going to the Pacific. So they're going to the other parts of the country. So we see a lot of people organizing in California who were from New Bedford. So, and one of them is Jeremiah Sanderson. And Jeremiah Sanderson goes to California. He's from New Bedford. He was a contemporary of Frederick Douglass. He goes to California and sees that young Black kids are not being educated. So again, he starts a school. And he sends letters back home so people know what he's doing. And eventually his whole family goes to California, but they were educators. And his daughter becomes one of the first Black teachers in this particular city that they lived in California. So they're organizing, but they're organizing in different parts of the country. And education was one. New Bedford at the time starts the textile industry. So there aren't that many African Americans hired by the textile industry. New Bedford was very interesting. And New Bedford uses immigration in very interesting ways and very similar to other communities. New Bedford begins to bring in more Portuguese immigrants. They also begin to bring in a lot of Cape Verdean immigrants. And so they're able to kind of cut off the supplies of jobs for Black people because whaling has dwindled and the textile industry was very concerned about labor union strikes. So they hired different ethnic groups who won't necessarily talk to each other or work together so they can keep wages down. So that's the whole labor movement here is absolutely fascinating because that's what they were doing. Yeah, let's bring those people in. We can pay them less. We'll make more money for the capitalists. And of course, that's how I look at it. But New Bedford does have a couple of labor strikes, Bread and Roses in Massachusetts, and here they fought for, a 40-hour week as opposed to, so those things happen.
I had one more question that would wrap everything up, Ronan. I didn't know if you had more follow-up from the before.
Well, I want to at least offer a chance to ask if you have any more discrete kind of stories from your ancestors or people related to them in New Bedford that you'd say is a favorite story, or one that you like to tell, or one that you'd like to have out and preserved here.
Well, one of the stories I really like to tell, besides the fact I talk about my grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, teaching and meeting her husband down there. But the there's also a story that has to do with the Johnson House. So the Johnson House is an Underground Railroad house, and a number of people come through that house because they were sent by sometimes the Roach family. Sometimes some of the white abolitionists would send people, like they sent Frederick Douglass to the house and said, the Johnsons will take care of you. So that's how he ends up there. But we also have Philip Piper. So Philip and Robert are two of the children, again, of Amelia and William. Philip is 2 years younger than Robert, and there's a family that comes to New Bedford from Georgia, and they are three daughters, and the mother, who is the technically the concubine of Patrick Gibson. Her name is Betsy, and Betsy comes. Um, Patrick was very wealthy and had a big peach plantation in Georgia. And he has these young women are his daughters, and they're very fair and they're very attractive. And he understands and knows what will happen to those girls if anything happens to him. Because, of course, by law, he can't marry Betsy. And also by law in Georgia, he can't free them. So I always have this image of him coming to New Bedford, going to the docks and saying, I have this family who might take care of them. And he's sent to the Johnsons. So the Johnsons take this family in, and Patrick Gibson sends money to them every quarter. And it's astounding. He sent them $2,500 every 3 or 4 months. Now, here, we're going to go back just a little bit to Mr. Condon saving papers, right? Patrick wrote all these letters to this family, the Gibson family, asking them, did they need more blankets for the winter? I have a great peach crop. I want to send peaches to you. But he wrote to them all the time. Mr. Condon saved all those letters, and those letters are in our library. So you see that he was very concerned about them. And after they'd been here in New Bedford about 3 years, he dies. And when he dies, his estate wants the family back. His estate in Georgia wants the girls back. And the families here, the people here in New Bedford, want to know why he wants them back. What is he going to do with them? And he comes up with all these ruses. He's going to send them to Newport. Newport is in Rhode Island. Newport is a slave state. No, they can't go there. Well, they're going to go to Newport because I'm going to send them to the Caribbean. That's why they're going to Newport. So he comes up with all of these different ways that essentially people recognize that these women are just going to be re-enslaved. So the Black community and the white community come together to save this family. The white community, the white lawyers, are able to get the will of Patrick Gibson because Betsy Gibson believed that he would have freed them. So in his will, it would say that, but it doesn't say that. And he couldn't by law. So it's explained to her that he might have wanted to free them, but by law, they were not free. So eventually, Nathan Johnson, who has been, the kind of the lord and master of the home, he's arrested for kidnapping because he won't send these women off to be enslaved. So that's a whole thing. But the white community, the Black community come together and he's free. And the individuals, the Gibson estate down south eventually gives up and allows the women to be free. So it's this is like I think this is like 1835. So it's before people really are thinking about the Civil War. But that's a really great story. And we have pictures of the girls. So that's another thing. But it's so interesting because people would say things like, well, he could sell them to New Orleans. And everybody knew what that meant. That meant that they were going to be prostitutes. Everybody knew what that meant, but they never say those things because that's not how they discuss it. They discuss it as, well, they could end up in New Orleans, and you know what happens there. So there's all that kind of ways that people talked about slavery that didn't really make it into news reports, but that's the underlying discussion that these girls were just going to be destroyed. And I mean, even now, almost makes me cry, but that they didn't care. They didn't care about us. They didn't care. And Philip, of course, is my ancestor, so that makes the Gibsons my ancestors. So that's one of my favorite stories. So that and my grandmother's gone south and teaching and their commitment to social change and the individual steps that people could make for social change.
That was amazing. Thank you for that.
I'll send you the article. There's an article. I'll send it to you.
Please.
Thank you.
Because it's
Absolutely love hearing all of your stories. You're a wonderful storyteller. What do you think the story of the Underground Railroad can teach people today?
Well, it's interesting as I'm going to be doing this Sailing to Freedom exhibit and talking about how people made really choices that might have affected them negatively, but they made choices to help other people they did not know because they knew morally what was happening was wrong. So I think the Underground Railroad allows people to see that you can put your life in danger for someone else. We watch the news all the time, so there's always those good stories about um, the Good Samaritan pulling somebody out of a flaming car. Well, that's what people did every day on the Underground Railroad.
Mm,
That's what they did every day and didn't make the news. They just did it. And it's about the morality that are the foundation of our country, but also the morality of good people and their ability to help others make a way somehow in this life. So I am obviously a writer and a historian, and I've collected a number of these stories that I've written with another individual, and we're actually using the stories and articles from the time out of local newspapers to show
mm,
how people did this. Um, that it really was about working to save other people's lives when you didn't even know who they were.
yeah,
And that's about very much about what's happening now with the whole issue about immigration.
mm,
So we'll be pulling those things together.
mm, mm,
Well, I want to thank you. Um, it's been a wonderful way to talk about my family and to make sure that some of the members of my community get their highlighted for a
mm,
change.
mhm,
So I know Carl was almost in tears when he finished the interview with you guys. And there are other people who are just waiting. And, some of them are quite elderly. So they're like so happy that their family members are going to get mentioned. Mentioned.
Yeah. I want to say thank you again so much.
mm.
This has been incredible.
Thank you.